Right, should we try that? Can you hear me? Right, well, good morning and welcome to Governance and Audit Committee. We are quorate this morning, so we will start the meeting now. So if we could turn to item 1, the minutes of the meeting held on the Thursday, the 24th of June, 2021. And I think they start on page 5. I'll just take them a page at a time for accuracy only. Please indicate if you have any queries. So page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15, page 15, Mr. Plaskett.
Just at the top of the page, there's just a typing error. Should say, top line should say on. And on paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the paragraph beginning finally, the last sentence of that paragraph, I think, needs rewording. It says, to have more assurance in this area, this matter, further conversation. It just needs a word taking out. I think just maybe this further, just take the word matter out, I think.
A further conversation, yes. Okay. Page 16.
Yeah, can I just, on page 16 as well, just at the top, we've got an action, but there's no action by. Nobody's been singled out to take care of that action. It was agreed, however, that the risk assessment will be carried out on this matter. So I didn't know whether somebody was going to do that.
Right. So do we have an owner of that action? As that was the internal audit plan, that I imagine would be the internal audit manager. So can we allocate that to her? And if it's not, then she can advise us who she's delegated it to. Page 17, page 18, and lastly, page 19. Are you happy that we approve those as a true and accurate record of the previous meeting? Agreed, everyone? Agreed. Yep. Right, lovely, thank you. John, could you turn your microphone on? Thank you. Right, actions arising for the minutes, if any. I don't have anything outstanding. Does any member have anything they wish to raise? Okay, so let's move on to item 3, apologies for absence. Julie, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we just have the one apology from Councillor Clark.
Okay. Lovely, thank you. So item 4, urgent business, which I have none. So we move on to item 5, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations that members wish to declare which they haven't previously declared? None. Lovely, thank you. So non-members wishing to address the meeting, we have with us Councillor Burt. Welcome, and indicate to speak when you would like to, and we will take you in turn. Obviously, Councillor Burt can't vote, but he's entitled to participate. Okay, so we move to item 7, training, standing item. Now we've had some, Alison, over to you. We've had some correspondence on this.
Thank you. Yes, at last meeting we spoke about refreshing the Treasury Management training, and it was just a question to the committee whether you would prefer face-to-face training or virtual training. We can do either, so it's your preference.
So members, open to you. Councillor Monument.
I'm for face-to-face if possible, thank you.
Well, I'm ambivalent, so I'm quite relaxed about it. Jane.
I share your ambivalence, Chair.
Right. Okay, Councillor Burt.
A request, please, Chair. I'm not a member, but please may I participate in the training?
I think it is open to all members who express an interest. So I think then the consensus is face-to-face. And we'll need to agree a date because we did have a date, but they're not able to make that date now. Okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to raise on training?
No, thank you, Chair.
No. Lovely. Okay, right. We now move on to item 8, the Constitution Contract Procedure Rules. And we have with us Anton Bull. Welcome, Anton. Over to you.
Okay, so I don't propose to say too much about the procedure rules because you've got the changes in the paper in front of you. But just by way of background, as you know, the procedure rules form part of the Constitution. They're about providing a framework to reduce risk in our procurement process, but to provide an open, fair and transparent way for us to procure goods, services, works, etc. They're there for a number of reasons. They protect the council by providing, like I said, that open, fair, transparent perspective. They protect officers. If officers follow the procedure rules, then they can be confident that they're complying with the governance processes. And they also make it fair for our suppliers out there, knowing that there's a level playing field and they know exactly what the rules are for how they can go about bidding for council contracts and council business. The procedure rules need to be updated from time to time. This is just a sort of relatively routine update to the procedure rules. There's nothing radical changing in the rules. I know there seems like several changes in there, but there's a couple of key things that have driven this. One was an audit report that came out in March of this year that just highlighted as the result of the split from South Holland District Council, we needed to review the procedure rules because there was some terms in there that referred to sort of shared officers, so we just needed to update some of those things. And also there's a need to update them because of the UK's departure from the EU. We're governed by the public contracts regulations, which in turn were governed by the European public procurement directives. There's been some changes to the public contracts regulations as a result of our departure from the EU. So simple things like instead of advertising in the official journal of the European Union, the OJEU things, we now advertise on the Find a Tender service, which is the sort of UK, UK successor to that. So a few changes in there just to update those and update some of the references. And then I've just picked up a sort of few things being sort of new in, you take a fresh look at things. And for example, we talk quite a few times in the contract procedure rules about the public contracts regulations, which have been around for some time, but there's also something called the concession contracts regulations. And whilst I've no reason to believe we haven't been complying with anything in those, I think it's worth just drawing those out in the contract procedure rules to make sure that anybody who's reading the rules understands that they are there. And if anybody wants me to be very Anaraki, I'll talk about the differences between a concession and a public contract, but maybe we'll save that for a training session that you'll all be desperate to attend. As a consequence to the changes to the contract procedure rules, there's some subsequent changes to the delegations to officers. Procurement matters are an executive function, so part of the sort of Cabinet's responsibilities. Cabinet to allow the effective working of procurement have delegated a number of those things to officers, and those delegations just need to be updated as a result of a few of the changes in the procedure rules. And the other thing that was a tidying up exercise, we noted that the contract procedure rules are part of, or a sort of subset, if you like, of the finance procedure rules. But in the sort of current version, the numbering had gone slightly askew, so the contract procedure rules just followed on. So they started at 5.7, I think it was. And we just need to actually separate them out and start them at number 1 again. So my apologies to the paper, because I talk about, previous procedure rule 5.7, new procedure rule 1.1 and things like that. So it is a little bit messy in there, but hopefully whilst the report is a little bit like that, you can see in the appendix where you've got the crossing out and the new words put in there. Hopefully that's very clear. So if you have any questions on the changes, happy to take any questions from you.
Thank you very much. Members, we are asked to consider this, approve it, and then the final recommendation is to recommend to full council that they adopt it. So any comments on this paper, members? Mr. Plaskett.
Thank you. Just one. I noticed on page 40, I read through this, it all seemed very logical and clear to me. You seem to have removed EU procurement thresholds, but one was still showing on the table on page 40. It says £75,000 up to the EU procurement threshold. Should it still say that?
It shouldn't. No.
Mr. Plaskett demonstrating his eye for detail here, which is...
I just wanted to prove I'd read it.
Yes. We'll just let Anton find it.
Apologies, that will get corrected.
All right, Councillor Monument.
If you just go back to the previous page, 39, there's a slight over enthusiasm there. 9 is competition requirements, 9.13. There's something going to be deleted. And it's been overdone. It says where the estimated total value for a purchase or concession is within the values in the first and second. It then says, and third columns, which has been struck out entirely, including the columns. I think we need our column back, or columns back, to make sense of that bit. Yes, I'm just checking my notes, and yes, the other one I'd found was the same one as Mr. Plaskett has just quoted. I'm afraid so, yes.
Audit committee is where you want them. I absolutely agree. So it's a very vital resource.
Are we still on the same one with page 51?
No, 51
No,
is
that's all right, that's
the
the next
financial management code.
Page,
So that's
page
on you,
38,
Alison.
I had a query. What's a call off? 38, 8.2.3, it happily says things about where the terms of the agreement are sufficiently precise to cover the particular call off. I've never heard of a call off in connection with contracts. And it happens twice in that area, so
Anton,
explain.
There we go. So a call off is just a term that's used in relation to a framework agreement. This is kind of typical of anything. There's jargon that's associated with whichever profession. So I've removed standing lists from the procedure rules because actually standing lists essentially have now become framework agreements. So starting at the top, a framework agreement is where you kind of put in place some contracts with suppliers to provide you with goods, services or works, but there's no sort of minimum order value. You kind of have them there like a standing list used to be. So it's a group of suppliers that you can go to on a regular basis to say, now we've got this requirement, please give us some quotes for it. If you then choose to take up one of those quotes, that's called a call off. You're calling off from the framework. So my apologies, it's a little bit jargonistic, but that's all it means. It means entering into a contract under the framework agreement.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chairman. I might be another anorak actually. I'm looking at page 32, the first one, 1.1.1. The sentence, I think the R in that sentence should be have, awarding contracts that have the most economical advantage. And that kind of also led me on to something else. I was sort of thinking I appreciate that economical advantage contribution actually has come from the public contracts regulations, which is new to me, and I have been reading it over the last few days. But when it mentions economically, is that really what it means? And if so, which economy? Is that the UK economy, Bretland's economy? And how are we going to measure it? or is this phrase really what it is financially most advantageous contribution? A couple of other comments which sort of follow on from that, and no matter which term it is, whether economically or financially, I took a scenario in my own mind of what would be a really bad thing to do, like, if we award, are we stopped from awarding a contract to somebody that's using tax evasion and exploitative labor and no environmental and that sort of thing? And I just wondered, under that initial basic part, whether we would be excluded from doing so. And I looked further in the document, and it's on page 42, which has got the evaluation criteria. And there are some mentions of things in the evaluation criteria which sort of partially address some of these matters, but they don't give any frames of reference as to what those evaluation criteria might be. So if you did have somebody come along, I don't know, working overseas, burning coal to make whatever it is we're buying, which part of this do we use to exclude them from the process? And just one final point, which is probably the most significant, actually. On the way through here, that part on page 42 does mention environmental assessment, but what we haven't done is put in here any of the carbon accounting or assessment. And that's a crucial part which this council has signed up to now with our climate emergency declaration. Now, there seems to be a slight confusion or lack of appreciation between the difference between environmental issues and carbon emissions. Now, while they're loosely associated, they're very definitely not the same thing. And that carbon side of things seems to be missing throughout the document. So a few things to get your teeth into.
So I'm afraid I missed the reference where you said it should be are and have. So if you could let me have that again, I'll get that corrected. But if I talk in sort of more general terms about the most economically advantageous tender, in the public contracts regulations, that they do go into a bit more detail about what you can take into consideration for that, and it does mean wider than just the kind of financial elements, and that's what it means in terms of that most economically advantageous tender is you can take into account environmental considerations, you can take into account delivery, after sales service, and all of the things that would be required for the contract. And then when you're building your evaluation criteria, when you're going to evaluate a contract, that's kind of what we do in the procurement team with the service managers very early on. We have to agree what the evaluation criteria is going to be, and we have to tell suppliers what that is. We have to be very open and fair and transparent, and that's where a number of authorities have come unstuck over the years under the public contracts regulations. The public contracts regulations apply above certain thresholds, the sort of 180 something thousand for goods and services, and the 3.6 million for works contracts. I may have the numbers wrong. The numbers change every 2 years. So in terms of what applies to the public contracts regulations, we then apply that for the below threshold requirements, but we can be a bit more flexible about it. And again, if I'm going to be very purist under the public contracts regulations, when you're letting something above threshold, there are two very different parts of the process. There's your supplier selection process, and then there's the evaluation process. And some of the things you talked about in terms of supplier selection, there is a list of criteria within the public contracts regulations where we have to exclude suppliers. So if they've been convicted of some of the serious offences of fraud, tax evasion, and those sort of things, we're left with no choice. We have to exclude them from the process. And then there's a group of other criteria where we have a choice about whether we exclude them from the process. And that comes into some sort of, I suppose, if you like, you'd call them lesser offences. But that could be if they've had a health and safety breach or something like that. And this is where we have to be careful, because I've had experience in the past where you've had somebody who's had a health and safety breach the year before, as a result of that, actually what they've then done is they've completely revamped all of their health and safety procedures. They've retrained everybody, and actually they're in a much stronger position than somebody who hasn't. So we don't put sort of blanket rules in about them, but that becomes part of our evaluation process. So there's that supplier selection piece about, are they a fit supplier to supply the goods, services or works that we require? And then there's the evaluation criteria about actually the tender they're putting forward. And some suppliers will be excluded of that supplier selection process. So for example, if we've got something where we require people to have ISO 14001, the environmental management standard, and they haven't got that standard or an equivalent, then we could exclude them at that stage. If everybody's got that, and then we move into the evaluation stage, and they've all submitted their tenders, it's then about how, for our particular requirement, they are going to manage the environmental issues in there. So that's then down to kind of what they put in their method statement in their tender, or what they say they're going to do. And this is where, like you said, there's a variety of criteria, environmental criteria, social criteria, that we can build into our contracts. What needs to come after this is the procurement strategy, and that's kind of the next thing on my list to do. We have something called a procurement intentions document, which is a couple of years old. I think it is. It's out of date. It's another one of the things that sort of auditors have highlighted. So, like I said, it's on my to-do list, and that's where we can take some of these, if you like, high-level requirements, and we can then start breaking them down. And that's where the things you've talked about, the carbon reduction program, the environmental management, the social value, that's where we can really start to build those into that procurement strategy.
Thank you very much. I haven't had any. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry, picking up on specifically that part regarding the procurement strategy, whilst I appreciate it's not in place at the moment, does that then mean to say that this is going to need to come back to us? Because obviously on page 43, we reference shortlisting and that pre-qualification process that you've mentioned, but there's no mention of a procurement strategy in there. Would that need to then feature?
Yes, of course. I anticipate the procurement strategy will go through the sort of cabinet approval process, and I'll be guided by colleagues here. If that comes to Governance and Audit Committee first, then absolutely fine. But yes, that's not something I just go and sit in a corner and write and present to the organisation and say, here's the procurement strategy. No, that needs to go through the approval processes. And again, corporate management team will need to have a look at this, and it will go through a number of reviews to sort of shape it into the final thing. And as usual, these things are, I'll do a sort of skeleton, if you like, and then with a reasonable amount of flesh on it, and then circulate it around, and we'll get it to the final shape and something that's really right for Breckland Council.
Lovely. Any further indications from members of the committee? Lovely. Well, thank you for that. It's interesting. I mean, one worries about it being too complicated, so that people don't bother to interact with the council, because actually the hoops we make firms jump through are too onerous, so they just don't bother to interact with us, so that we don't get proper value for money, because we only get a few firms who factor in the extra costs of dealing with us and charge us accordingly. So I think there is a balance to be had, but we must remain within the boundaries of the law and the framework. So we have 3 recommendations here for the committee to consider. The first one is that the proposed amendments to the log of delegations to officers relating to contracts detailed in Appendix A be approved. Number 2, that the proposed amendments to the contracts procedure rules detailed in Appendix B be approved. And recommendation is 3 is to recommend to full council that the constitution be amended in accordance with Appendix B, so that contract procedure rules are inserted after financial management standards. And we have made a couple of minor suggestions, amendments, which officers agreed to take on. Are we happy to agree that? Yes, brilliant. Okay, thank you. So we now move on to item 9, the SIP for Financial Management Code, on page 51 of your agendas.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is a report just to provide you information, really, as a committee, about a new SIP for code called the FM Code, or Financial Management Code, and to give you an update on the Council's progress against that code so far. It's brand new. It was created to try and help support local authorities in financial management standards following some of the more recent examples that we've seen where there's been some high-level failures in their finances. So we carried out an analysis of the detailed criteria behind the FM code, and the RAG rating, which you see in the report, shows that the council does do well against this code in most areas, but as always there's room for improvement. And page 55 shows a summary of the actions that we'll be undertaking over the coming months to bring us up to green performance in all areas. Otherwise, hopefully the report is self-explanatory, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologise now, I'm joining the ANARAC team. On page 54, item J, we've got a typo in there, and on item O, we also have a finical. Indeed. So, apologies, but thank you.
Any further comments from members? I mean, I'm glad to see that we are broadly conform with the new code of conduct, and actually looking at the areas that are highlighted on the RAG rating, there seems to be no sort of major structural issues in terms of our performance. And of course, as one of the very few local authorities where we don't have net borrowing to fund, I imagine that compared to some councils, we're at far less risk, though it's important that we get these things right. This code, in terms of the timetable and what's required of us, I just wanted to check that, if I go back to the recommendations, note the report and progress. Will we finally have to approve this or send it to full council?
So no, this is not something that you need to approve as such. However, in the current financial year, 21-22, this will form part of the accounts audit, I expect. So EY will audit that we progress against this code. Last year was a shadow year. We didn't have to comply, but this financial year we do have to comply. So yes, you'll sort of approve it as part of the statement of accounts rather than individually.
Fine. Okay. Any further comments or questions? Okay, so we are asked to note the report. I think we can honestly say we've done that. So I'll now take us on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 10, the unaudited statement of accounts 2020 to 2021, which is on page 56 of your agendas. So Alison, back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, these are the usual unaudited accounts for last year. They've been presented to EY for audit, and it also includes the annual governance statement at the end of the accounts. Once it's been audited, this committee will be asked to approve both the accounts and the annual governance statement, hopefully in September if EY complete their audit work by that time. At your February meeting, we looked at the accounting policies, which you approved, and there's some minor changes which we've made since then, which are detailed at paragraph 1.2 in the report. I think my main message for today is that these are very unusual accounts in unusual times. So a lot of the comparisons to prior years look very different. It's mainly due to the government grants for COVID, over £50 million of government grants, which we have received and given out to businesses, and government grants which offset the lost income from business rates through the retail, hospitality and leisure discounts, which are still held in our accounts at the moment. We've put a new note 31 in the account, which tries to explain all of those oddities. And that note is referenced throughout the statement to try and point people in that direction, should they read them. I think the balance sheet on page 87 is the main area of focus. And that's what I've tried to explain in the report. Short-term creditors, short-term debtors, cash and bank, and our reserves are all showing unusual balances. And those details are shown in the report. Just a couple of areas I did want to cover, if I may. Firstly, the pensions liability. I think we probably have this conversation every year about the pensions liability. It can just swing wildly in either direction. And just to reiterate that this is not a cash deficit. This is an accounting balance based on actuary assumptions. And because CPI has been higher and our discount rate has been lower than assumptions, that's why it's changed so massively. Our cash payments are only affected by the triennial review, which is actually next due in March 2022. So that is the only thing that actually has an impact on our cash payments. And secondly, unusable reserves have increased by nearly £11 million, which would be lovely if we had £11 million to spend on other projects, but it's not a real increase. Around 6 million of it is the government compensation to offset lost business rates from those discounts. And a lot of the other money is grants we're still holding to pay to businesses. They've all been paid out now by the end of June, but they were in the accounts at the end of March. And finally, just one thing I need to bring to the committee's attention, which is not in this report because of timing. We have this year received a formal objection to our accounts. There is a window period where any elector in the area may object to our accounts. The objection relates to the treatment of a single £10,000 grant payment to one organisation under the Small Business Grant Scheme. I'm confident that the treatment of that individual grant is correct, as well as the rest of the 50 million in there. But of course, EY will be carrying out a full independent review, as they have to do, and they'll be reporting back on that to myself and to the committee as part of their audit if needed. Otherwise, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Members of the committee. Councillor Monument.
Can I just get that absolutely clear in my mind, that you have just said, among other things, that unusable reserves can include funds being held on the short term which have been paid out? Because on one or two occasions I looked at the figures and thought this doesn't add up. Clearly unusable reserves have been used, but they can be if it's for the right thing. Is that it? Sorry.
Sorry. So
Very welcome, Councillor Guybird.
I'm sorry if I said unusable reserves. I meant usable reserves has increased by 11 million. Apologies if I said that wrongly. Unusable reserves, you're absolutely right, are not used in the terms of spending them. However, the balances do change. So, for example, this year it's changed because of the pension deficit increasing. So the unusable reserves, the opposite side of that, has also decreased. So you're absolutely right. They're not usable in the general sense that we can spend them on things, but the balances do move based on revaluations of property and pensions.
Councillor Monument, did you want to come back on that? Any other? Mr. Plaskett.
Thank you, Chair. I've actually got quite a few questions, but I think you may have sort of answered a lot of them. I'm confused by the government grant situation because it makes looking at accounts very difficult compared to how we've looked at them in the past. But perhaps I can go through. I've got a couple of pages, if that's okay, Chair, to go through.
That's what we're here for, Mr. Plaskett. So,
but I think some of them will be sort of one-word answers, Alison. But can I start on page 68, please? Can you explain to me the major reduction in both the budget and actual on place compared to 2019-20? There's a significant reduction in spend. I just wonder how you would explain that.
Yes. So.
John, you need to turn your microphone on.
Thank you.
Yes, so the current year includes just under £2 million of government grant income for the additional restrictions grant. So that is why it looks unusual for that reason within place. I think that's the main reason. Yes, so the grant income comes in and then gets spent out. But also on that one, I think we also had, yes, so also within there, we may have had, I think last year we had a broadband contribution of 950,000, which was a one-off. So I think that falls under place, although I would need to double check that.
Thank you. Also on that same page, the contributions to and from reserves, we've obviously got a 10 million compared to a million credit the previous year. I guess you're going to say the same thing, aren't you? You're going to say that's government grant related.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That relates to the 6 million held for business rates and the couple of million for additional restrictions grants. So yes, the majority of that is all the additional government grants as well.
Thank you. Just generally on government grants, I guess the money we've been given by the government has to be passed on to service users or repaid. Sorry, but that can before you answer that one, because can we just look at page 69? I'm always surprised when you see a general heading of like 14 million for fees, charges and miscellaneous, which is like the third largest grouping of expenditure without any explanation of the major elements of it. I just wonder whether we should, I know you put a note about it, but whether we should identify and value the key proportions of that 14 million. Thank you.
Yes, so in terms of the grant questions, you're quite right. It either is paid to service users or we would have to pay it back to government, with the exception of the business rate ones, because that is to compensate us for lost income. The additional restrictions grant, we did fully pay out to service users, so we haven't got to pay any of that back to government, I'm pleased to announce. And actually by spending it by a certain date, it actually made us eligible to receive another 900,000 from government. So that's will benefit our businesses. In terms of the 14 million, yes, it is a sort of covers everything else, miscellaneous. It's everything that's not already mentioned. And you're right, it has some big areas such as planning in there, enforcement income, and also income from our partners such as ARP, and it would have still had South Holland in it. So it is possible to put some of the headline numbers in that note. That would be possible to do.
Can I now move on to page 74, which is really cash flow. How would you explain the increase in cash and cash equivalents, 8.6 million compared to 5 million? And you're probably going to use two words again, government grants.
I might go 4 words on this one. So it's increased because of government grants, you're quite right, but actually it hasn't increased as much as our other balances like reserves that we saw the 11 million, and that's because we've spent a lot on capital such as our new waste equipments, waste vehicles equipment. So it would have increased more had we not spent the capital, but you're right, it's government grants.
And now move on to page 84, please. Actually, I think that may just repeat an earlier question, because I was going to comment on the Place Directorate and the Strategy and Governance Directorate. Again, I think that's probably, yeah, my question was, how do you explain the 2.4 million reduction as a 32% in Place Directorate? I think you've covered that in an earlier question. Also, there was an 18% reduction in Strategy and Governance Directorate, down from 6.5 million to 5.3 million. I've got a sneaking feeling that could be a similar answer on that one. And also, what is other income and expenditure of 23.17 million? I'm probably second guessing the answer.
So, yes, strategy and governance, I've just managed to look it up. You're quite right, Place is the same answer as before, it's a couple million government grants. But actually strategy and governance is where the 950,000 broadband contribution was. Just managed to look that up. The other income and expenditure is a sort of an accounting adjustment, because it's everything that we then reverse in and out of the accounts for local government. But you're quite right, the difference between this year and last year is mainly the go. Sorry.
Thank you. Can we now move on to page 85, I believe. 85, yeah, 85. First, again, we've got the Place Director, we've talked about that. Halfway down that table, you've got a phrase, remeasurement of the net defined benefit liability stroke asset. I read that, I read the note. I didn't really understand it. Could you put it into layman's terms for me?
In simple terms, it's the pension adjustment, which goes through the I&E, but you will notice that almost at the bottom of that table, there's another line that says actuarial gains and losses. So that's where the big variance in pensions comes, whereas the remeasurement of the defined benefit liability and asset is always a smaller movement and tends to be similar each year, because that's not based so much on the assumptions.
Thank you. Move on to page, yeah, page 86. And I think you sort of touched upon that, and Councillor Monument did. Unusable reserves have reduced by 25 million in a year, and that consequently brought total reserves down. Is that primarily, I suppose, primarily you're going to say pensions on that? I don't really know why I'm asking these questions now. Now you've done your preamble. Is there anything else in that because that's a significant reduction? We've gone down from 32 million to 6 million.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Primarily that is pensions, but equally there is a reduction in our revaluation reserve, because some of our assets have gone down in value, but also it holds the collection fund adjustment account, one of those lovely local government accounts. And the way the accounting worked on the business rates is we had a significant deficit last year because of those business rates reliefs that were given. And that sort of £16 million deficit is carried into the new year, and then is split between the preceptors, ourselves, central government, and we use the grant in the new year. So those unusable reserves include that reduction in the collection fund deficit as well.
Thank you. I was going to ask about page 89, the cash flow, but I think you've really answered that. The increase in creditors and is government grant related. So I'll move on to page 109, if I may, please. A little confused on that table. On last year, we we itemized this equity securities. This year we haven't. Is there a reason that we've done that? And equities that seem to have gone up significantly down the bottom. It says other investment funds and unit trusts. Equities have gone up from 19.7 million to 37 million. And in infrastructure, we've got 5.2 million compared to 1.9 million. Can you just explain those differences from one year to another, please?
So these are where the pension fund assets in the pension fund scheme are held. So this comes straight from the actuary. It's not money that we've invested. So it's, I think it means that they've taken the money out of equity securities. So there's no assets held there anymore, which is why there's nothing shown in that part of the table. But they've increased their holdings in infrastructure and general equities instead.
Thank you. We're making good progress. On page 116 is my next question, if I may. Only that we're not, no, this is just a pure numbers thing. On the end column of the 2021, we haven't got a totals put in. Sorry, that was just 16. Page 118 and 119 I was going to talk about, but that's short-term debtors and creditors. And I guess, once again, that's all caught up with government grants.
It's, yes, partly government grants, but partly the NNDR collection fund deficit as well. So those two are sort of intertwined, particularly in the debtors on that one.
Thank you. I was confused by this, Alison. The comment at the bottom under deferred capital receipts and reserves talks about hold the gains recognized on disposal of non-current assets, but for which cash settlement has not taken place. But we've got 10 million that's been sat there for 2 years. How come we've not received the cash for those capital assets?
Sorry, it took me a while to find those there for you. Page 124 was that. Yes, so no, it is the same £10 million. These are actually our finance leases. So on some of our investment properties. So there's a couple at Riverside and also our Barn and Broom property. So the way the accounting works for them is they're not shown as an asset on the balance sheet because under accounting terms we're getting our return through the rentals over time. So the £10 million is a very long term, sort of over 50 years. So that's why you don't see that number coming down so much. And actually this year has been an unusual year in that some of those leases were amended to give terms, for example, on some tenants that maybe a rent holiday for a year. Well, that has the implication of then changing the deferral for the rest of the term, even though it's only for a small amount for 1 year.
Thank you. I think I get that. Couple of quick things at the end, page 130 and 31. Oh, this is being extremely picky because it says at the bottom of page 130, it says the gross investment in the lease is 23,507. And on the next page, it says 23,509. I'm sure that's probably just caught up in rounding, but always concerns residents and the public when the numbers don't tally.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They should agree. So it's either my adding up or roundings, you're correct. And hopefully Audit will pick that one up.
Yeah, just very quickly on page 151, at the very top of the page, if I can find it, it says the below rather than below is just a wording issue. Thank you, and that covers my my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to comment? Councillor Monument and then Councillor Burt.
Mine's a very quick one. Somewhere way back, if I can just put my pen on it. There was a little bit I didn't understand at the time. I think it was page 79. Sorry to be a nuisance. Can you all find page 79? Something about investment portfolio, last column, and it said unit site. And I puzzled over that for a long time and then suddenly wondered if it was simply a spelling mistake. Page 79. Yes, investment portfolio, last column, unit site. Is it actually unit size? I don't think you can find it. I can't find it at the moment. Right. And that's all I've found at the moment. Thank you. You've satisfied all the others with the help of Mr. Brasky.
Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following up on the challenge to the accounts, I wondered how long it would take before that's completed and how much does it cost to go through that process for a £10,000 challenge? But I suppose that kind of leads on to something else as well, which has sort of been rumbling in the back of my mind for a while, is do we publish who has received these £10,000 grants, or how did somebody know to be able to challenge that? And the reason that's rattling around in my head is this is purely from media correspondence, so saying some people with second homes have elected to pay NNDR rather than council tax and received the grant. Now, I don't know whether that applies in Bretland or not. I suspect far less than perhaps in North Norfolk, but that might be sort of a matter where other people might want to challenge.
So in terms of how long, I've got a meeting with EY tomorrow to go through their progress. So I don't think it will take very long because it's quite a straightforward query. Unfortunately, how much? Yes, EY will charge their day rate because we'll have to pay it, sadly. They have said that they'll try and minimise it as much as possible, but ultimately it is a process that we will have to pay for. So I'll be able to update the committee on that in September. More. Now, the advice was not to publish the grants paid out for commercial, and some of them went to personal individuals, a bit like you said, those second homes potentially. But the advice was given not to publish. So we haven't published anything on our transparency page, and nor have most councils. I believe the objector got the information from the accounts of the other organisation in order to find it. And second homes, you're quite right. It is, if people have opted to have those second home, well, their holiday homes, should I say, registered for business rates instead of council tax, and then they would have been eligible for the grant under the scheme. Having said that, there is new guidance and consultation out to try and tighten those regulations up more, so that a property can only be registered for business rates with certain criteria, such as it being available for X number of weeks a year for rent and that type of thing. So I think it's been recognised by government that that's potentially an issue.
Councillor Monument.
I was forgetting. Page 130, under leases, in the middle of the page, there's a bit that says finance leases, and there are 4 bullet points, and then there's a paragraph, and there's a usage there which puzzles me. It may be right, but it sounds odd to me. It's talking about, in the second line and again in the third, the minimum lease payments comprise settlement of the long-term debtor for the interest in the property acquired by the lessee and finance income that will be earned by the council in future years, whilst the debtor remains outstanding. Should that be debt? Oh, good. I'm relieved at that. And the other thing I've got written here is, why are parts of this redacted? And I've got that against collection fund. Now, I'm not sure whether I was looking at the. Thank you, that's it. I'd got page 79, but that's the page on within the unit. Yes, why have we got so many black squares on that? 140.
Yes, this is presentationally, obviously doesn't do what it should do. The idea of the black squares is that council tax, for example, doesn't apply to certain of those lines. So the sort of 4th line down is NNDR income. So we've blacked out the council tax column because there will never be a number in there. So perhaps that's something to take away next year presentationally. Maybe it doesn't work.
I just wanted to pick up on the point about the allocation of government grants to businesses and stuff. I think the key issue here is that it's not a political decision for the accounts team to decide who will or will not receive a grant. It was our responsibility to get the grants out in line with government guidance. And that is something that we did in an exemplary way as council, and therefore we were able to receive a further tranche of money from the government in order to further support Breckland's businesses. So I think that it is a political point to be dealt with elsewhere, but it is, I would say, beyond the remit of this committee or the council to decide to make judgments outside of the guidance that's come from central government. Any other comments on this item? Mr. Plaskett.
Sorry, there's one thing I missed, Alison. On page 89, there's on the table cash flow statement, there's a purchase of short and long-term investments where in 2019-20 we spent 123 million. Is that a hangover from something we picked up and didn't correct last year?
Yes, this isn't a real purchase, should I say. This is our investments where we put money out and get money back. So there's a sort of an in and out on those 2 lines within the cash flow. In last year, we put out an awful lot of short-term overnight type of things, type of investments, which meant that all the money, every time we put money out for a night, whereas this year we've tried to do much sort of longer, month at a time rather than that.
Okay, I mean, I think what the accounts demonstrate is the amount of central government support we've had through the COVID crisis. And as a result, as an organisation, we have come out through this as financially unscathed, well, certainly to any great degree. So I think we have to be thankful for that, and also for the exemplary way the officers have managed the council through that time. So congratulations. We asked to obviously note this. Are you happy that that is what we have done? Lovely, thank you. So we now move on to item 11, the future work programme on page 186 of our agendas. Was it 168? 168, sorry. Okay, so that is in front of us. Does any members have any comments they wish to raise on the draft work plan, or any officers have any comments they wish to raise? We're next due to meet on the 30th September. We were going to have some training on that day, but that is now not, they can't provide it on that day. So as we've already agreed, we're going to have face-to-face training, but that will be on a date to be advised. In terms of the financial reporting, is there anything else that you would like to bring to the future work programme that isn't already in there? Good. Okay, right. Well, in that case, I think it's down to date of next meeting, which I've already alluded to, which is the 30th of September, 10 o'clock in this room. Thank you all very much. Oh, Councillor Kybird.
I arrived, I missed the procurement item. Will that, the appendix B, will then be completely renumbered with all the clauses taken out? Yes.
It will indeed. We still have Mr. Bull here, so I don't know if you just want to reassure.
No, I was going through it when my reminder came up. So.
Yes, absolutely. It will be completely renumbered. Unfortunately, we have to show all the changes at the moment, so it does look very messy. But yes, there will, once it's all passed and gone through and it becomes part of the Constitution, it will be a clean copy numbered from 1.
So when that goes to council for approval, will the renumbered version be attached so that it's clear what is going into the Constitution?
I hadn't planned to. I mean, we can do it. I was sort of advised to show the changes in, here and then. So once it goes into the final version, but the changes in there do show that 5.7 becomes 1. And that sort of thing. It's just slightly messy, I think, in there. But if colleagues are happy for me to, I can attach a clean version for council. But I think normally we just show the changes.
Any further comments before I close the meeting? Great. Well, thank you all very much for your attendance. I now close the